Happy to see everyone here today. Yeah, we have 3 topics on the agenda. I think they're also all safe for YouTube, yay. So that means we're going to be sharing all of them with the internet. Hello, internet. So the first topic is quick fixes for Grafana query editors, and I will be demoing those and we'll be showing you what kind of quick fixes I came up with, and then we can discuss whether they make any sense. I also have a panel edit user flow prepared where I still have a lot of knowledge gaps in understanding even like how people use the panel edit. So I'm curious about all of your input, and maybe if the YouTube audience out there also has input on how they edit panels, then feel free to add comments. We're happy to read them. And then Teddy wants to tell us about API key interaction, and we'll show a flow for that. And yeah, because our agenda is quite full, I would say let's get quite right into it. One thing before we start, however, I hope that most of you already know we have a note stock for this call. I just shared it in the chat. Everyone is a note taker, so please help us take notes and record the feedback that everyone is giving so that nothing goes forgotten after this call. And also we want to assign 2 note-taking champions to encourage everyone else to take notes. And I cannot do it today because I'm presenting. Any volunteers who want to make sure that the notes are being taken?
I can give it a go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. And a second person so that Josh is not the only one.
I'll do it. Gita.
Cool. Thank you, Gita. Thank you, Josh. That's awesome. I will take care of the timekeeping, and I think I will just get started with my first topic, which is the query editors. So let me quickly share my screen. I think I have to open the Grafana first, though. Where is it? Here it is. Of course, now the Grafana is still loading. I'm hoping that it will work. Come on, Grafana. Okay, yeah, for some reason, now it loaded. Great, thank you. Sorry for the delay. All right, so the problem that I wanted to address with these query editor quick fixes is about certain enterprise plugin query editors. So one of them is the CloudWatch query editor, and we have a similar problem in the Google Cloud Monitoring. So basically what you can see here is that first you pick a query mode, and then these metrics here, region, namespace, and metric name, they are all linked. So if I pick one, oh great, this is not working. But theoretically, like there is a dependency between picking this one and then the next one. I think it shows better in the Google Cloud thing. Yeah, now you can see it. Like I have to select the project first, and then I can select a service, and then the metric gets pre-selected, but I can select another one. But if I pick a different service here, then I think this switched to something else. So like it's hierarchical, but in order to select like the deepest level of the tree, I have to pick all the others first. And as you can see, this like vertically arranged drop-down collection just takes up a lot of vertical space, and the query editor gets a bit big and clunky. And so I was approached by some plugin developers to make this better. And then also what they talked about was that sometimes, like if I wanted to group these, then they would kind of belong to the same category. So if you would put like project and then next to it service and then the selector, the developers weren't quite happy with that, and they wondered whether we could have sort of like a super label that would label like all of these as a group together. And the current query editor components don't do that. We only have one type of labels, and we don't have the option to make label groups. So 2 things that I want to solve. Let's see here. Can you see my Figma now, or can you still only see the browser?
Only
the browser.
Okay, then let me share again. All right, here we are in Figma. So basically, for the field picker, in the, for example, in the, I think this is a Google view, there, they only have one drop down instead of like multiple levels. And if you click it, then you get sort of like a modal view where you can filter your entire database, and you can see how resources and scopes are grouped, and you can filter them and search directly, and then you can pick one element here. There are some things that are not so great about this interface. For example, you have checkboxes here, which don't really make any sense because currently you cannot select multiple of these things to monitor as your metric. You can only select one, so theoretically we don't need checkboxes. But I did try to steal this kind of interface because I think for all relational data sources, having the option to explore your data more deeply and see what is actually in your database could be helpful, especially as I know that for some enterprise data sources, the dropdowns that we currently have, they sort of break if you have too many metrics in there. So if you have, I don't know, thousands of options and you try to search within a dropdown, then you don't even get all the results. So having some sort of modal view like this one where you can filter and search through your metrics, even if you have a lot of them, could be a better option. And because this is kind of a table-based view with filters, I was inspired by the dashboard search that we already have, because like the filters on top here are quite similar. And then we also have the list with folders and hierarchy. And then we also have list items with checkboxes. So I thought, oh, hey, that's quite similar. Maybe I can reuse that. And then I also wanted to make it similar to the table list that we already have, because it's a bit more space efficient, because like these, they have a lot of padding and you can't see so many at once. So I tried to throw all of that together into a query editor design. So basically, instead of having multiple drop downs, I thought like we just call it scope and we have one drop down. And then if you click on it, you could get a modal where you are able to pick a scope and have a search box and options to sort and filter these. And the thing is that the data that we had in the Grafana query editor looked a bit different and was a bit differently arranged than the data that was in this screen here. So I'm not entirely sure whether just copying this and using these categories or like metadata makes perfect sense. We'll still have to discuss that, but we would be able to maybe show additional data like locations and resource types, and then maybe also add a description like in the Grafana query editor, where for the metric you would get these additional descriptions under each metric so that you could understand better what this is. All right, so this is the first fix. And then for the label groups, that's kind of a quick one. I just played around with multiple things. So I tried to find a query editor that has a problem with a label group. And I think this is one, like there could also just be a general visual bug here because this just looks really off, but that was how it looked in my browser. So I used this one and tried to arrange it better and thought, okay, how can I make this aggregate functions thing a group? So this was one idea that I had, to just make a double column label. And in this case, it works well, but I thought, okay, what if you just have one line and not two? And then here, I think having the super label and then the regular label look the same might be a bit confusing, like that's not the most clear. So I thought, okay, could we do like a group area behind all the labels? But then we already have so many different background colors, and this could get tricky to pick the right background color. So I experimented, like this would be the same background color as the labels, and that looks kind of off if the labels don't have a background color anymore. So this would be sort of a semi-translucent version. Maybe this could work, but that also depends on the new theming. And then I also tried, what if we just drop the label background color completely for the super labels and only have label background colors for labels. And I think that is quite interesting because it's so clean, but then I wasn't sure, like, are the rows still clear enough? Like, is it still easy enough to read it like horizontally? So I also tried a version with just line dividers, which I think also works okay. But then we have sort of like a little bit of like this line so close to these lines. I think that's a bit hard to look at as well. And then I also tried using borders for the labels so that we can still use the same background color, but that's a bit weird because we don't really use borders for elements like this anywhere else in Grafana. So yeah, 2 things that you can give me a little bit of feedback on. Now it's your turn.
Not having background, I think, makes it clearer that those are not clickable, which sometimes people try. So even if it looks less nice, but I think it does improve functionality and accessibility at once. I do like the version with horizontal lines because it is indeed easier to follow. That's all. And I'm really nice to see all these experimentations that you've done.
Yeah, for sure. I'm like to circle back to that pop out, the modal that you had, and that kind of blew my mind in good ways because you kind of completely changed. As far as I know, there's nothing else that we've got that does this, and it seems like a really potential great way both to handle very, option and data rich data sources, and also maybe this could be a step towards how we handle wizards in the future, because I know, Jess, you've played with how to make Grafana easy enough that your mom could use it. So maybe, this sort of space could, like have an alternate version for other data sources that is an even simpler version that's a wizard with more guidance. But anyway, really, really cool way to think outside the box here.
Yes, thank you. I agree that this is one of the big potentials. I myself have the problem that I try to query stuff, but usually I don't know the data at all. And then these dropdowns really make it hard for me to understand what is actually in the database, and being able to have all the groups visible at once and being able to see how they are nested and how they are named could be helpful for people who don't know the data so well in exploring their stuff before they query something. So I think that could be interesting, especially for less advanced users. And then for more advanced users, they have the upside that instead of having to click through several layers of hierarchy to get where they need to get, they can just directly filter for whatever they're looking for because they might already know the metric name.
Hey, as long as we're chatting about this, Daniel or Dave, Cal, or other people who uh, who do actual queries on the regular, what's your take on this? Would this be useful to you? What jumps out?
Yes, as I'm involved in this, so the example that Jess showed there before, that's from the Azure portal. So I think Josh is the one who's suggesting that we should start using that. And you didn't actually show the Azure one, but that's actually far worse than the 2 examples you showed, where it's not 2 or 3 drop downs, it's like 10. I think you have to in a row you have to fill out to get one metric. They have like so many categories. You have to choose every single category in the right order to be able to show one, say, CPU metric. So it's the usability of that, particularly that one, is really, really painful. I think we also have a similar problem for SQL databases, where if you're in Grafana, you can't. There's no easy way to see like what tables exist and what columns do they have. So I think it's slightly different than this. Here you're looking for maybe for a metric, and there maybe it's rows and columns. So it's a slightly different metaphor, but you have a similar problem. So
yeah, when I was designing this, I was remembering the conversations we had with the ADX contacts from Microsoft, who also wanted to get a better overview of their data. So I'm hoping to, I mean, I just stole the terminology from this one solution, but I'm hoping to make this more general so we can use it for all kinds of relational databases, because I think the more tables you have, the more helpful this becomes.
So the thing that that I'm a little bit confused in is like the hierarchy here. So because these APIs, you have to kind of select one and then the other. So they are very kind of, the information is kind of, you have to select one thing first, then the other. And I'm not sure how that's gonna work in this design. So how, yeah, what are we seeing? Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe I might talk to that. I think from like that kind of technical feasibility, I think is some questions we do have around what APIs we could use. However, though, I think this kind of does, even in, there might be some new APIs we can use that allow us to query the data to build this interface better. But I think even with the existing kind of hierarchical APIs, this is actually still kind of like, I think fits and follows that, you know. We can list and enumerate all the resource groups, and then
because I think that the way that I would have presented this would be in sort of like a cascader or kind of separate table, so you can still see all the scopes or the hierarchy. So you can see the top level scope, the second level in separate sort of tables, almost like, or separate columns next to each other. And that's kind of how InfluxDB, for example, if you look at their UI if you select measurement and labels, and so it's kind of gets, because this looks too flat for actually showing you a hierarchy.
Yeah, that's definitely something I could explore. I didn't want to use an actual Cascada component because that has a lot of issues with the hover, but yeah, good point. We are out of time, but Łukasz is raising his hand. So last feedback from Łukasz. Łukasz, where are you? Did we
I think you're muted.
Sorry. I think it surfaces much more information, which is great, and it improves understanding. The thing that I'm a bit afraid is that we are breaking two conventions here. The one is that with query editors, you can almost get that like a command line flow of working with keyboard. So we go step by step. And the second part is here we don't have checkboxes. So the analogy from the previous examples here is lost because we are checking by clicking on a row, which usually means in our terms like going into specific object or specific element after clicking. And that approach definitely needs to be tested with those enterprises that sometimes load like thousands of rows, because with some query editors we hit the limits of our current solutions. So if someone would need to render here like 80,000 elements, probably it would take forever. So only those three considerations. But it is now I understand what's all of those things that we are picking from. So definitely improvement on that part.
All right, awesome, thank you. We're out of time for the first feature, so I will just move right to the next one. Thank you for the feedback so far. So the other thing that I've been working on is the panel edit, and I'm currently attending UX writing training. So I was tasked to do a content audit for whatever I want to do a content audit on. And because Torkel requested that I tweak the panel edit a little bit and make it better, and I already know that we have some hierarchy issues there in the panel settings, I wanted to do a content audit for that. So the first thing I tried for this effort was to create a user flow. And while I created that, I noticed that I still was confused about many parts of the panel edit. So I just want to show you what I currently understand, and then maybe you can enlighten me, and also we can discuss like which different options different types of users might want to take, and whether there's even like one global user flow or whether there's multiple options, how users would approach creating and updating panels. So the one thing that is quite universal is that you go to a dashboard and either you add a new panel or you edit an existing panel. So basically the question is like, are you creating a panel from scratch? And then there's options for yes or no. And if yes, then probably you want to start by querying some data because you don't have a query yet. If you would not create a panel from scratch, but copy a panel, then you might already have a query. But yeah, usually if you want to create a new panel, then sometimes it's like a pre-filled query. But when I did that, I got basically an empty graphite query editor. So I knew, okay, I first have to pick my data source in order to query the right things. Then I do want to create a query here. Like in this case, it's still empty, so I have to do that. In some cases, you do have like a pre-filled query here and you already get a graph, but sometimes not. And then if you have a proper working query, then the visualization appears. In this version, like when I tried it, I just got the no data feedback here. And I thought, oh, maybe that's not so ideal, because especially for a not familiar user with this panel edit flow, users might not know why there's no data. Like, what does this mean? Oh, it's just because the query is empty, but is it obvious to people that the query is empty? I'm not sure. So that's something that we could discuss. And then after the visualization appears, either you can go directly to tweak it, or you can add a panel title in the panel settings, and you can tweak the time range if you notice, oh, this is not the specific data that I want to see. You could also tweak the query options or add more queries. But yes, then I thought the querying some data would sort of be one bigger step. And then afterwards, the entire part of, oh, I have a visualization now and I want to make it better so it serves me better, would be kind of like a second step in the process of tweaking the visualization. So you would probably want to pick a type, and then there are different things you can adjust, like the legend, the units, what is displayed and how. But here I'm not sure whether all these terms are equally clear to users, like what options hide in these accordions and how would they know which option to look for in which accordion. And that's something that we are already aware of, that it's tricky. That's why Torkel is currently experimenting with how to throw a search into this panel settings pane. But I think even if we have a search, we still have the issue that maybe users aren't familiar with the terminology. Like they wouldn't know to look for the legend name, so they wouldn't know how to find it. So worst case is they try to search for it and then they don't find it. And then they click through all these accordions trying to find whatever they're looking for. So I'm generally wondering how we can structure all the options that are in here in a better way that is more self-explanatory and easier to look through, because like there's so many options that it could get overwhelming. And then there's all these like sort of crossed out parts here where I think they're not relevant for the step of tweaking the visualization. But honestly, I don't even know, like, are these more advanced options, like for example, adding links, having repeat options, having time regions, tweaking your variables. I think these would sort of be additional because not everyone needs those. You might need them as a more advanced user. And then there's things that I don't even really know. Are they advanced settings or are they something else, like field settings, overrides, and transforms? I know what some of these do roughly, but I'm not sure when in that entire flow users would want to make these changes. Yes, so I think that's how far I got with the user flow. Then I have lots of criticism about the writing and the content and the tooltips and the labeling that I think there's a lot of potential there to make that clearer and better. But I think we should start with the general structure and how we arrange these options here before we can go into detail on how we label stuff and how we make it searchable. And yeah, then there's also the difference between starting from scratch and starting with the query, or tweaking an existing query where, I don't know, you might want to change the data source, but maybe not. And then probably you would either modify queries, tweak the time range and other options, or just go from the existing query directly to the visualization. Yes, and I have no idea how accurate this is, so I just wanted to see everyone have a discussion on it and listen and learn from everyone. And also the general question, is this entire approach of wanting to make this easier to understand a good idea, or is it completely useless because most of our users already know this anyway and they don't care and they just want all the options in one view and they like it the way it is right now? So yes, opinions.
So Jess, I love your analysis. Unfortunately, you chose the graph panel, which, well, it is true that it is currently our kind of default panel. It is also old and going away. It is also the only panel that has not had someone go through it and fix it up the way that we have the stat panel and bar gauge and everything else. It is going to be replaced by the time series panel. I would suggest doing this again with the time series panel and see if there is if that's a little bit easier. However, most of what you got from most of your analysis is still going to be totally true with the time series panel. They just got rid of, they took stuff like series override and a bunch of that and put it in places that make more sense, like field options and overrides. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. What's really weird with some of the things, especially the order, is query options, for example, is probably something that you would, and Torkel and Daniel, tell me if I'm totally wrong here. Query options is something that you would probably fiddle with after you get results back from your query, because you use the query options to limit results and data points and kind of make the results more manageable, but query options is on top. So yeah, the order of things is totally not intuitive. So
yeah, I think we've mixed it up with some with transformations and other sort of data options. It isn't a pure separation between query options and visualization options, like I think it maybe was at one stage, and now it's a little bit mixed. So yeah, that's where it gets weird.
Well, before it was really mixed in terms of transformations was part of the panel options.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons that where I proposed unifying the the field tabs and the panel and the settings tabs, or what. And in that process, we need to really kind of also go through the categorization and the order of these kind of collapsible sections, because that's going to be also critical, I think, to have and it's super hard to sort of, but because we have so many standard options like min and max and thresholds. Where should they be? Should they be always in the same position in the side menu? They might be sort of more or less important for different visualizations. But yeah, I mean, but in the change that I proposed a couple of weeks ago was to get links and repeat options, and sort of into the panel settings. So have the sort of panel settings, which has so it shouldn't be as called settings there. It should be maybe sort of title and advanced. I don't know. That is super hard to find titles that make sense for these sections, where you change the title and but then have these links and repeat options as like advanced subcategories. under that, because it's not a display options really, they're less commonly used.
All right, Torkel, I could not keep up with that, so I hope you can enter some of your thought in the notes document. And I think that what you're saying makes sense, but I think it also is more granular than the problem that Jess is really pointing out here, is that we don't really have an obvious user flow in the panel editor. So if you're new or heck, even an intermediate user, you go in and you look at the panel, there's no obvious trigger to, okay, I do this first, and then after that, I should do this next. I mean, just as a, someone who reads from left to right, the place that I would logically start is actually in the space where the visualization is, but that's, not an editable thing. So how can we, so maybe we should think about how, as we're fiddling with the panel editor, how or should we add some guidance there to guide the user where to go first, next, and what a logical flow would be. And I know it's hard because there are so many different use cases, but maybe kind of general guidance at least.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to find these sort of general groups of tasks that people might want to do, so that we have something to start from in terms of like categories or steps. But I can also see that Lukasz is raising his hand again. So Lukasz, please.
Yeah, I definitely represent the user who doesn't know how to deal with query editor, because that's all magic for me. But the thing that always bugs me when I actually open it is that I catch myself thinking, why? But I have idea of how I want to see things, but actually that type of visualization is only a option within all the other stuff. And in my head, the type of visualization impacts also the query, or at least like what kinds of data, how aggregated, or what type of like information, if that's not a time series database, what I need. So this is like this, the outcome that I expect, or the output I expect, like influences how I think of what steps should I perform to get that visualization in place. And that visualization is only like under settings and usually folded. So this is something that always bugs me a bit. Not much of a help, but yeah, just wanted to throw that.
No, I perfectly agree with you there. And we have noticed this issue, and Torkel has been working on ways to get the visualization picker on a global level, kind of out of the settings pane. But I still wanted to understand, so at which step in the process do users usually pick the visualization? Do they actually do it first, or do they do it after they query something? Because for me, that would still impact where in the panel edit we position that picker.
Or do they do it at all? Because we know that I've been told anyway that the graph panel is the most popular visualization, and it's also the one that people get if they don't make any selection. So are people just completely missing that they have the option of different visualizations, or do they not care?
Exactly. I also looked at competitors, and I looked at Kibana and talked to Gio, our Elastic expert, a bit about it. And there, they focus very much on selecting the visualization first and then picking your query and doing other stuff. And at least Gio, who is used to Grafana, obviously he is biased, but still he was like, yeah, it's fine that I can pick the visualization first, but then sometimes I query something and then I want to change the visualization after all, and then I can't because in Kibana it's not as easy. So I think there's probably like a bit of both, where you might want to select it first, but then later on you notice, oh no, it doesn't look the way I want, and then you want to change it. Yes, David, you have also feedback?
Yeah, I'm also trying to what I think could be worth pursuing is the sort of starting with something non-empty and reasonable, and then the user refines more and more, right? So this would mean having a panel with random data, saying that this is random data, and then you have the option of first either, okay, well, I want to change the styles, or I want to tweak the query because I want to plug in my data, right? So this might also satisfy the case where someone is just kicking the tires. They don't even have a data source yet, but at least they can play around with the graph panel already, and they can just try a couple of visualizations without having to do anything else.
Good point. Yes. I actually like it that in some data sources we have the pre-populated panels where you already get a graph basically out of the box. That always like reassures me as a more novice user, because I know, oh, everything is working, and like now I just have to tweak the query. Yeah, so I will consider that. Torkel.
Yeah, no, something I've been thinking about is related to transform specifically, but I think it relates to this as well. So where I think Grafana can help the user a lot more in terms of kind of informing you that the data your query returns is not good for this visualization, and maybe it's automatically switch to another data source visualization, or just should suggest switch to this. So the data you have now cannot be. We have this as only one look for the graph, where you can sort of switch to the table when the graph identifies that the data cannot be visualized. But I think that could be improved. And it could also, I think, be vastly improved for transformations, where you can suggest transformations, or yeah, have some kind of interplay there where Grafana can guide the user more, or describe why we're not showing anything or something.
Interesting. Great point. Thank you.
I
Okay, we're
admit
almost out
it
of
did
time.
make me a little sad, because as you're going through this, I'm like, I wrote a document for this. Read the docs. But I get what you were doing to just to share. I get you were doing, seeing if you could do this, just based on UI stuff. But we do have docs for this.
I know, if I had time, I would have researched all of my questions. Unfortunately, I didn't, but yes, it's on my to-do list. All right, we're almost out of time. So Josh was raising his hand before Torkel. Josh, is that still relevant?
Yeah, no, I think I just want to say kind of similar to what Torkel was saying around like understanding that this query is not suitable for this visualization. I myself have really had struggled with formulating the right queries to kind of get that end result that I want to. Understanding like the grouping and aggregate functions and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, I know I want to see how many of this is happening per day, but like I don't quite understand how to get there. Like those functions in my queries. I understand this is kind of going a little bit further into more the deep diving into how to make queries area, but it's something I do relate to.
Okay, yes, great points. I struggle with the same stuff, so I can absolutely relate. All right, so thank you so much. I will stop sharing now and hand over to Teddy, since we only have 20 minutes left. Teddy, are you ready?
All right. Yes, I'm ready. I'm looking for feedback on a very specific UI interaction that I'm struggling with for some reason. I feel like I'm just having a brain freeze, and I started working on a million permutations last night and decided it would be better to just get some feedback in the feedback session. I'm going to give you some background on what I'm talking about. So what I'm working on is a way to make, this part of the onboarding wizard in Grafana Cloud easier to use. So right now we have all of these agent integrations where the user can install an agent on their computer. We have these sort of like plugins where user can visualize existing data. And then this section is meant to provide the user instructions on how to get their existing metrics, logs, and traces, although I'm not sure it applies to traces just yet, into Grafana Cloud. And so if you click on Prometheus, Loki, or Graphite, I'm going to click on Prometheus here and I go next. you get a quick overview sentence, and then when you click configure Prometheus, we actually take the user to their grafana.com portal with some instructions. And so what we would like to do is actually bake these instructions into the wizard. And this will solve a couple of problems. First, the user won't have to flip back and forth between grafana.com and Grafana Cloud. So that'll just be like a more seamless experience. We would also like to automate some of this process. So essentially, we give the user some instructions with these code snippets that they have to run on their command line or add to their Prometheus configuration in the case of Prometheus. And they have to enter their own information. And so we'd like to automate this in the cloud, in Grafana Cloud. And then the third thing that this will solve is also that there will be sort of like a next step where they can see specific information related to this. And so we want to make all of this better. There is this specific interaction that I am working on to generate the API key and somehow put it into this snippet. And I'm struggling with how to make this as seamless as possible. So that's what I'm looking for feedback on specifically. So I'm going to jump over to Figma and the actual mockups that I'm working on. So this is the new updated version of the Easy Start integrations wizard that Oana has been working on, and it's very beautiful. And you'll notice that there is a sticky footer, which is something that a lot of people have been requesting. So that's a huge improvement. But essentially the user would click Prometheus, Loki, or Graphite saying, I have a local Prometheus instance and I want to get that data into Grafana Cloud. So I'd click on Prometheus and then I come here and I can select whether I want to send metrics from a single instance, from multiple instances, and from multiple high availability Prometheus instances. And based on that, the instructions will change a bit, but the interaction with the API key will be the same for all of them. So I'm just going to show one use case. And I have a couple of options for how the user can do this. So one option is that this is an actual step. It's like an explicit step to grant permissions. And essentially the user would name the API key and then click generate. And then once they do that, they'll get a message saying the API key has been generated and placed into the code snippet below. And then you can see that it's automatically been placed here. I also created a version where the user has to explicitly copy the API key and then paste it themselves into this, this snippet. And I think this is an extra step and it's a little bit more cumbersome. However, I have thought about the fact that this might be confusing, that like there's almost like no closure. You've generated an API key and you might not understand that it's been placed here. So that's something I've been working through, is like, what makes more sense? Does it make sense to have our system paste it here or have the user explicitly paste it themselves into the snippet? I also created a flow where there's essentially like a modal that comes up. So the user would click generate new API key, and then they have to name it and choose the metrics publisher name or role. And in order for this to work, I think that the role has to be metrics publisher. And so something else I was thinking about is like, should we even make that an option for the user to select the role, or should that just happen on the back end? The API key is created with the metrics publisher role. They would click API key, and then they get a message saying, again, your API key has been generated and pasted into the code snippet. They close it, and then it's already here. So those are sort of like some of the things I'm thinking about, is like, should we explicitly ask for the role, or should we make that happen on the back end? And should we automatically paste it into the snippet, or should we force the user to actually like paste it manually themselves? Any feedback on this?
I think what you could do is to show third step, which is enable Prometheus remote right after user has generated the API key. So keep the text as you give feedback to the user that he has been generated, and then the interface can shift focus and scroll a bit down where that is happening, or combine the message that the key is generated and now you can copy paste to clipboard.
Okay.
Because without, they also risk to try to copy paste something that is not working yet.
So it'd be like this, and then
yeah,
we
exactly. It
have
would be like
some
that.
progressive disclosure. Okay.
Yeah.
So I like your first mockup. The one that automatically puts the key in and gives you a message. However, I think that you should tell them at this point that the API key with the metrics publisher or whatever permissions has been generated, because even though they might not care about that right now as a beginning user, they will probably care about it later as they learn more and learn that API keys can be associated with different permissions.
Okay. So maybe just be explicit, like your API key with the metrics publisher role has been generated.
Yeah, and if it turns out that they might want different permissions, then you could also add a field beside that. I mean, if metrics publisher is the only correct one for the API key, that's totally for right now, then you don't need to give them a selection here. But if at a later point there are other permissions that you want that people might want to choose, then you could also add a field beside that and add some explanation. So I like this because there's room to iterate more later as well, and it both makes this simple for new people, and it also gives room to expand later on.
Okay.
I just wanted to let you know that for the Grafana Enterprise metrics, where the access policies are created and tokens are generated, we went with Levi and the rest of the team, the backend team, through the API key generation process. I think like Patrick improved that a bit as well. So there is already a flow happening. So maybe you can just steal that idea, because it happens within the model window, but it basically allows you to actually name the key and to give you an idea that it has been successfully created, and then you can just do whatever you want with that.
Sort of like this.
Yeah, it's pretty similar, but everything is done. I think like even it's coded already, so maybe even that component can be used out of the box basically in that scenario.
Okay, and where would I find that if I wanted to reference it?
It's for the Grafana Enterprise metrics. So I think like Patrick is not on the call, but I think if you ask Patrick, he will just point you to the specific and current Figma file. I would do that, but I just don't know right now which one is the current one. So don't want to misguide you on that.
Okay.
I have a little bit of feedback. I think in general, this one-page clear steps directions are really great. And I love that you're giving lots of user feedback. So whenever they interact with the page in some way, it's clear that, okay, something has happened. My interactions have triggered something. So that's very nice. The one thing that I would like to remark, and that also ties in a little bit with Oana's suggestion about the progressive disclosure, you should consider these designs of yours within the constrained viewport context, because if you have multiple steps and then the button is sort of at the bottom of the screen and the user clicks there and then something appears under it, like, would it be obvious to the user that they still have to keep scrolling to get to the next step and stuff like that? So yeah, just something to consider.
Okay, that's helpful.
At least looking at the notes, Nico has some feedback.
Yeah, I left most of my notes in the notes, my thoughts, but you talked about that thing needing to move between the product and the terminal. If I remember correctly, try and uninstall and install Docker. I remember just being so impressed on their onboarding in terms of moving between the product and the terminal that it was a great experience.
Oh, okay. Well, so our objective is to not have the user have to go into the portal at all with this. Essentially, like, this would replace the need to go into the portal.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I remember when I tried setting up the Prometheus stuff on my machine. This was before the wizard or any of that. I just was very confused. It was very jarring to have to go from the portal, which looks completely and totally different from everything else Grafana-ish, to back to Grafana. So yeah, I like the idea of keeping the beginning users well away from that, because it's, speaking from experience, those instructions are kind of intimidating.
While I have all of you on the call, I'd like to get feedback on one more thing. So I've been working on flows for Prometheus, Loki, and Graphite, but Prometheus seems to be the most complicated, because if you have multiple instances or multiple high availability instances, there are sort of like optional values that you can add to the code snippet. So it's very simple. If you have one, you literally copy and paste this snippet and add it to your one local Prometheus instance. If you have multiple instances or multiple high availability instances, there are optional labels that you can add. I'm just highlighting it here, which would essentially make it easier to query specific data from each of those instances from Grafana Cloud. So you could query Prometheus 01 or Prometheus 02. And then in the case of high availability instances, Gotham was explaining this to me yesterday, but essentially this would allow you to reference one Prometheus instance when another is down. They both have the same data, and we make it work that we're not storing both copies of the data in Grafana Cloud, and the user has access to it at all times, even if one like a node is down. And so for that reason, we give users instructions to basically, like right now I have written instructions optionally edit the values for cluster and replica labels, or in the case of just the multiple instances, it's just the origin label. And basically, like, the intention here is to tell the user that they can add this to each of the snippets for each of their instances, but they'll have to edit it themselves. And I was wondering if anyone had any opinions on like how to make this interaction easier or more clear, that this is sort of like a manual optional thing that the user could do if they have multiple instances.
So
Luke and David are both raising their hand. Like, do you have feedback on this question?
Is it like, because when I'm reading that, I am not understanding, but I don't know what is all that text about, of course, but I don't know instantly whether that optionally introduces that optional window as well, or is it a comment that I can optionally do something with that code. So I think like if something is optional within a step, it should be placed at the very end, and everything that goes into these things that need to happen should be before we mention that something is optional. So basically, okay, for me, that text, that text frame, that text area with copy to clipboard is optional because it comes after the paragraph that starts with optional.
Yeah, so my understanding, this is an interesting thing, because while it's optional, it's also like suggested. And so I got some feedback that even if this is here, like if, for example, I gave the user just to this code snippet and then gave them instructions afterward to add this part to it, that's fine. But if this is included, it doesn't negatively affect that instance. Like there's no negative repercussions, so we might as well just include it in the code snippet. And then if they want to do things with it, they can like change them for each Prometheus instance.
So maybe we should write consider then. And
okay. David, did you have any feedback?
Yeah, so I would probably try to figure out how common each of these cases are, and then maybe optimize for if there's sort of a 90% case here, then kind of optimize this whole workflow for that one. and then try to figure out where you can hide the advanced stuff, and then also put all the complexity there, and essentially allow the user to freely edit this thing, and put all the burden on them, kind of like giving them all the documentation, but we're sort of making sure that they're in charge of creating this thing. And then accepting this as the input and then going back to the flow here. Yeah.
In a way, we kind of wanted to avoid putting everything on the user, because this is part of the onboarding wizard, and we try to make them simple for them and not overwhelm them on the first usage.
Mm-hmm. I guess my argument here is these things could be simple to someone who is managing a high availability instance, right? So they didn't know what to do, right? On the one hand, you have someone who you're actively trying to help here, and on the other hand, if someone managed to install like a high availability metric sort of Prometheus setup, then I'm pretty sure they can handle this bit of config here. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
I think Nico still has feedback, but we're out of time. We only have 1 minute left. So Nico, is it okay if we leave it in the doc and Teddy can follow up with you if she needs clarification? Cool. All right. So we're almost out of time. Thank you, YouTube audience, for watching.